Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's EpiSkills webinar. This is the fourth session and the last session we're having this year. Thank you so much for joining. We have 3 speakers lined up. I'll just like to remind everybody that if you have a question or comment, please put it in your Q&A box, and we're going to allow all our 3 presenters to have their presentations. And then at the end, we'll address all your questions and comments, and we'll have a discussion. So our first speaker for today is Mr. Frederick Buch. I'd like to welcome him. And he's going to be our first speaker, and we're going to have all our presentations in that order: Mr. Frederick, Mr. Abraham, and we'll have Angelina at the end. So our first speaker is Mr. Frederick Buch. He is a young epilepsy activist, and he's the National Secretary for the National Coordination Committee from Mombasa, Kenya. Fred got involved with epilepsy work when his sister was diagnosed with epilepsy, and he had to quit his job to take care of her. Ever since then, he has been working hard to raise awareness about epilepsy, taking on challenges that will help bring attention to epilepsy issues. So Fred is not new to epilepsy awareness challenges, as in 2018, he embarked on an epilepsy awareness expedition where he walked from Nairobi to Mombasa, covering 482 kilometers in 12 days. He later took the stakes higher with the Buch Mount Kilimanjaro Challenge. As part of that challenge, Fred and his team first cycled from Nairobi, Kenya to Arusha in Tanzania. After reaching Tanzania, they then began the long climb to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, where they planted the epilepsy flag with the message, "Epilepsy is manageable." Welcome, Frederick, and you can go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Kindly let me just know if you can hear me well from the other end.
Yes, I can get you.
Okay. Allow me to just put my video, maybe for those that are joining in, to just see my face, and then I'll put it off so that I can continue with the presentation. I'm not sure if my video is on now and everybody can see me. Maybe moderator, you can help me confirm that.
Yes, we can see you.
Thank you so much. So once again, let me take this opportunity to really thank you for giving me a chance to share. And I will go straight into my presentation this evening. My name is Frederick Buch. I'm an epilepsy awareness activist, but I'm also a caregiver of a sister who was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 2. Her name is Mercy. She's now 18 years old, and she's seated somewhere just watching me doing this presentation. So straight into my presentation titled Innovative Solutions for Epilepsy Advocacy. And I'll start by saying that a statement by Jeff DeGraff that innovation is created as a result of constructive conflict. And you can agree with me that epilepsy advocacy and awareness has been here to really try and see how we can solve the misunderstanding or the misconceptions which actually have put us into conflict with trying to share that information, the right information about epilepsy. And that has been trying to demystify the culture, the traditions, the beliefs, the religion, and even policies. So, I mean, these are the things that have really put us into conflict when we come out to really share about the right information about epilepsy. And when you talk about innovation, actually, where there's a constructive conflict, then we are able to really get some positive results. Steve Jobs again says that innovation comes from saying no to 1,000 things. And when you look at the information that we share about epilepsy, as much as we are trying to solve the conflicts that are brought about the things that I've mentioned constructively, we are all trying to say no to discrimination for people with epilepsy. We are trying to say no to stigma. We are trying to say no to isolation, no to restriction, and also the violation of rights for people with epilepsy. So any innovative means of trying to give information out there about epilepsy is trying actually to say no to all those things that I have mentioned. And for real, we cannot really overemphasize the importance of epilepsy advocacy. I was looking at the social response report for 2019 by WHO, and it acknowledges actually that funding and resources needs to be directed to awareness, which is advocacy, and education. So I must say that this topic is very timely because if the bigger body like WHO can acknowledge that for us to have a social responsibility in trying to advocate for epilepsy awareness, then funding has to be directed to awareness and education. And this can be done through the public policy, the legal advocacy, and grassroots engagement. If we get that funding or those resources and we want to advocate for epilepsy, these are the three areas where we need to really direct those resources to. And innovative means of epilepsy advocacy, as we think of getting those resources to direct them towards awareness and education, the advocacy messages should center on developing messages which address, number one, the knowledge gaps. And when you talk about knowledge gaps, I know there's a lot of materials that have been developed out there, but my own experience in sharing information about epilepsy, I've seen there are knowledge gaps because there's a gap of that information being translated into local languages which can reach out to people. And our messages also should be centered around creating of relevant communication materials. Yes, there's a lot of research and information about epilepsy there, but is it relevant to the people that we are targeting to share this knowledge to? So our messages should be centered around that, and also practical to the intended audience. We might have a lot of information sometimes which is too scientific to our audience, and it might not be practical for them to actually implement. So while we develop messages around epilepsy awareness or advocacy, then they really need to be very practical. The interventions that improve knowledge should also be centered around individuals. We all know that not all types of, we don't have like one type of epilepsy that is for all these people that we are targeting. Every individual has also a very individual need. So sometimes this knowledge also should be centered on individuals. It should also reflect on families that are living with the people who have epilepsy. The messages should also be centered around teachers, employers, healthcare providers, disability service providers, looking at the first responders, and these are medical health workers, the traditional healers. I mean, that's a whole subject of its own, but when we talk of traditional healers, we also need to know how are we getting the right knowledge to them, because sometimes or many times actually people go to them before even they can be referred to hospital. The media also, I mean, we can again not overemphasize the importance of media, but we need to give them information and messages that are also true and real when it comes to statistics, when it comes to how they're supposed to even refer to people living with epilepsy and such like things. The community, I mean, this is the core of, the people that we target when it comes to the messaging that we are developing around epilepsy. And last but not least, the policy makers. And we are looking at the governments and people who have been entrusted to make laws and put them to effect. The messaging that we are also talking about for awareness and advocacy should be message that is leading to reducing or decreasing morbidity and premature mortality and adverse psychosocial outcomes. So I think with that background, even as we look also into the messaging that we are developing for advocacy to address the needs in areas of education, marriage and childbearing, community service, and access actually to appropriate and affordable healthcare. All that information, as I have shared, if it is centered around the knowledge that we want to put out there for people to really get to understand and know all about epilepsy, I think we'll be doing it in the right direction. So I'll be a little bit biased here because some of all those things that I have talked about are actually touching on messaging that will help us shape the public policy and legal advocacy. But you will realize that I have gone so much deep into the third one, which is the grassroots engagement, because by far, I think my experience in epilepsy awareness has been centered around very practical messaging that I want people to participate on when it comes to epilepsy awareness and advocacy. So allow me to just share quickly some of the grassroots engagements which will actually help us in advocating for epilepsy awareness. And one of these things that is tried and tested is the epilepsy expedition. I want to thank the moderator because she has just mentioned some of the things that I have been doing as an epilepsy awareness activist. And when you talk about epilepsy expeditions, this can include awareness walks, mountain climbing, long distance cycling. And when I say that they are tried and tested, in 2018, I had an opportunity to do my first epilepsy expedition, and that was walking from Nairobi city to my coastal hometown, which is Mombasa, about 482 kilometers, which took me about 12 days. And I think that was the beginning of actually even epilepsy getting a lot of limelight in the country, because it was all over in the news, in the newspapers, in the televisions, in the radio. And you can see I got a whole coverage on the daily newspaper nationwide, which the title was 482 kilometers for my sister. As much as in that is what they picked from the walk, I was walking so that I could represent all the people with epilepsy and trying to raise awareness for over 1.5 million people living with epilepsy in Kenya. And so that alone, I mean, gave an opportunity for a conversation to start across the country. When you talk about mountain climbing again, in 2020, I had an opportunity to do the cycling from, again, Nairobi to Arusha in Tanzania. It took us about 3 days, about 382 kilometers. And already even before we started, we had an opportunity to be hosted in very many interviews in media, because we were targeting the media to actually advocate for our cause in epilepsy awareness. And this included BBC, which actually interviewed us before we started our cycling, which was going to end up climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. This was not really easy. I mean, the photos that you're seeing there was the time when we were actually practicing to climb all other mountains before we got to Mount Kilimanjaro. So in Kenya, we did about 5 mountains. In preparation, we cycled about 1,000 kilometers in preparation before we went for the main event. And I mean, the impact of that expedition also was so great, because we were looking at having participants from health practitioners, epilepsy activists, sportsmen and women. And during preparation, they actually came out and they joined us as we were practicing. Of course, the target audience here to reach out with the awareness information was the general public. And so as a result, we had an opportunity to be covered in 4 mainstream national media houses that covered the expeditions, and reaching out to about 1.2 million viewership in primetime news. These were just the local TV stations in the country before we got the one for BBC. And so this meant that every other 2 years, we were ready to do an expedition to raise awareness about epilepsy. The other grassroots engagement that we can use in terms of epilepsy advocacy and awareness is art and fashion. Again, this is a tried and tested means of raising epilepsy awareness. Every year, we host an event called Epilepsy Afro Fashion Fair, which is basically an African-themed fashion event. And when you think of a person with epilepsy walking on a runway with the fear of any time a seizure can happen and they might, get an attack, but they take the runway, they go all the way and they come back. I mean, it's so fulfilling. When you look at these ladies here, you can't really even tell if any of them have or live with epilepsy. And that is the positivity that we are trying to bring out. Some of them are fashion designers. Actually, the ones that design these African dresses are persons again with epilepsy, and those that take the runway as well. But we try to also involve others who do not necessarily have epilepsy, so that we can also avert the whole challenge of stigma saying this is just meant for the people with epilepsy. And there are people who come actually to watch this show for fashion because they are passionate about it, but they get the messaging after that. And organizing our own, being given opportunities in major fashion events in the country so that we can just lay out the theme about epilepsy. So it's African, but we give it a touch of purple because we want to represent the epilepsy. We have the Epilepsy Artifacts Expo. This is another one where we try to involve children, design some art pieces. Again, they are African themed, but they have a touch of purple. And every year we are able to do this event and display what children with epilepsy are able to do when it comes to art and drawings, and even designing some jewelry around that. And that in itself also has really brought a lot of awareness and advocacy around epilepsy. And it's, as I've said earlier, these are grassroots engagement, very practical, intended activities that anyone can participate at any age and at any area where they are. The impact of these events actually, when you look at fashion and art crafts, is that you get children and youth with epilepsy to participate. And the people who do a lot of art crafts and the fashion designers themselves. We always target to reach out to the general public, children, youth, and young adults. Again, the result of this is that over the last 5 years, we have consistently been able to host the fashion event and the artifacts event, reaching out to over 2.5 million people with information. And that is where we get our goal of continuing to do the advocacy. The economic and social empowerment for for persons with epilepsy. They not only come to showcase their talent and everything else, but you have people who also come out to even buy their designs, their artifacts, and all that. And in return, they actually get to know that whatever they are doing is working. The exclusive cover in media coverage and interviews and features. I mean, right now we have a lot of coverage that we have received because of the uniqueness and innovativeness of such grassroots engagement events that we do to advocate for epilepsy awareness. We also tried what we call the Seizure Smart Training Program. This is centered around school. So we have a simple training that we do for seizure, what we call Seizure Smart School Clubs. We take the health clubs in school, we train them on basic facts around epilepsy and first aid, and we certify them by giving them a certificate. And when we started with schools, it also gave us an opportunity to actually be able to start that also in companies. So you train the employers there and you certify them as this is a company that when somebody comes here and perhaps they have epilepsy, if they get an attack, the employers can also be able to help them do the first aid. Over time, that also has had an impact as participants has been the schools, the companies, and our target audience has been the pupils, students, teachers, employer, employees. Again, consistent for the last 5 years, we've been able to reach out to over 103 schools and over 21 companies, which we can say now are seizure smart if you walk into them. The Epiculture Festival, this is another innovative way to advocate for epilepsy where we use drama and skits and traditional music to actually advocate for the messaging that we want people to get. Again, just because people are so much into things around traditions, they give it their all when it comes to a theme around epilepsy, and they're supposed to put out a play or a traditional drama, music. That is it's always fun. I mean, I really wish people would have an opportunity to just come and participate in these festivals, which are purely themed around epilepsy awareness, and people really participate. The impact around that has been that epilepsy messages emphasized through creative acting and music in local language. Actually, that is what I wanted to emphasize on, local language. So we make sure that the message is really intended for that local community. In Kenya, we have about 42 local languages, and these people are centered in different parts of the country. So most of the time, we really try to make sure that if we visit this part of the country and it's so dominated by this community that speaks a certain language, then we are able to develop messages around their local language. And identification and nurturing of talents for persons with epilepsy, the elders and traditional healers open forum. This is where they also come in. Last but not least, epilepsy impact stories. Just through the advocacy, I have had an opportunity to actually write weekly on the national newspaper. They have a magazine called E-Woman magazine. If you follow that link that I have put there, you will see the many articles that I've had an opportunity to publish, and they have really been very effective because on weekly basis, every weekend, they get an opportunity to be published and people get to read. Very basic. It would be either epilepsy and relationship, epilepsy and traveling, every theme around epilepsy, trying to attach it with the daily activities in our lifestyle so that people can understand that people with epilepsy also have an opportunity to just live a normal life. And over the time that I've had this opportunity to write, I've done about 35 articles, and they're available on the online magazine platform. And the readership count now, as at the time when I was preparing this presentation, was at 15,000 in 1.5 years. So again, that tells you it's an avenue and an opportunity to really advocate for epilepsy. So through public policy and legal advocacy and the grassroots engagement, which I have clearly said I'll be a little bit biased because the grassroots engagement is what I have really done as much. We can raise awareness about the issues affecting the epilepsy community and seek positive change by ensuring access to quality healthcare that is affordable and person-centered. Our advocacy and awareness messaging actually should go far into making sure that there is access to quality healthcare that is affordable and person-centered. And all these events and activities I've mentioned, we always have experts who attend, and they're always giving a talk about, where people can get that quality healthcare, which is affordable and person-centered. Ending epilepsy-related discrimination and protecting rights of people with epilepsy. I mean, that is the main thing that we always advocate for when we create such epilepsy. And finally, raising awareness and promoting education about epilepsies. All those activities and events are about promoting education and awareness around epilepsy. Fostering biomedical innovation by incentivizing the development of new therapies and the promotion of research. It is always a platform for people to start thinking of development of new therapies, counseling and promotion of research that will help us to advocate and raise awareness around epilepsy. So thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to present tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred, for that presentation. And I think you have set the scene for further discussion. So we want to ask all the participants if you have any questions, maybe from this presentation and the other two presentations coming. Please send in your questions through the question and answer tab that is at the bottom of your screen so that they can be attended to later. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Abraham Dambuza Chalichali, who is a development worker, practitioner with over 20 years of experience in strategic development and also community engagement. He's got qualifications in theology, development studies from several universities, among other so many qualifications that he attained in different universities and with over 20 years of experience. So let me invite Mr. Abraham from Eswatini to make his presentation.
Hello, my name is Abraham Chalinchali from the Kingdom of Eswatini. I'm the National Director of Eswatini Epilepsy Organization, and I'm also the project leader of the Trendsetter project in the country. I will be presenting on the ICAP, our experiences, what we have done, how we approached the ICAP. The 10-year 2022-2031 Intersectoral Global Action Plan on Epilepsy and Other Neurological Disorders, ICAP, is a culmination of a series of previous global resolutions, decisions, reports, and commitments, including Resolution World Health Assembly 6820 on global burden of epilepsy and needs for coordinated action at country level to address its health, social, and public knowledge implications. As we look back on the journey to the historic approval of the ICAP on the 27th of May 2022, we are made to recall initiatives such as the Out of the Shadows of the year 1997, whose objective was to improve the acceptability, diagnosis, treatment, services, and prevention of epilepsy, and the Promising Strategies initiated in 2006, which is a program that provides crucial funding to support initiatives that directly improve the quality of life for persons with epilepsy, among others. These initiatives played a huge role in facilitating epilepsy attention and awareness to the world, and ignited a process of fighting the rampant stigma, discrimination, ill treatment, abuse, human rights violation, etc. that persons with epilepsy experience. The Health Information Management System of 2016 shows that by 2005, about 4,000 people in the country were diagnosed and on anti-epilepsy treatment. But by 2016, there were over 20,000, with an over 80% increase between 2010 and 2014. This is evidence enough of Eswatini's participation in these Out of the Shadow and Promising Strategies, as well as other initiatives. The ICAP Advent provides an intersectoral approach to improving access to care and treatment for people living with neurological disorders, while preventing new cases and promoting brain health and development across the life course. It also seeks to support the recovery, well-being, and participation of people living with neurological conditions while reducing associated mortality, morbidity, and disability, promoting human rights, and addressing stigma and discrimination through interdisciplinary and intersectoral approaches. Coming to the IPE Africa Region Trendsetter Project. In view of the ICAP Advent, IPE Africa Region undertook to realign its focus to support countries' domestication advocacy efforts. And 4 African countries were selected as ICAP trendsetters to engage in organized advocacy activities for adoption and domestication processes. The purpose is to capture and document the domestication processes, challenges, and opportunities. This presentation, therefore, is about the case of Eswatini, showing how the country, as a trendsetter implementing chapter, has approached and implemented the Trendsetter project and the results thereof. Our case primarily demonstrates how we went about or are going about setting the scene for a conducive policy environment to exist before full implementation of the ICAP. This includes interactions with government, civil society organizations, international development partners, including World Health Organization, country office, and most importantly, the involvement of persons with epilepsy. The goal of the Eswatini Trendsetter project is to strengthen institutions and create strategic collaborations for the adoption and domestication of the ICAP in the Kingdom of Eswatini. This is about preparing the ground and setting the stage for ICAP adoption and domestication in the country. There are three distinct but complementary objectives that fit to this overarching goal. And these are: the first one is identifying and strengthening institutions and other actors that we need to work with for ICAP adoption and domestication. This includes sensitizing and building capacities so that they participate actively and efficiently. Eswatini Epilepsy Organization, or EEO, being the implementing chapter, is the number one target for this objective. There is need to assess EEO's capacities, identify gaps and limitations, and put in place plans and strategies for EEO to be able to lead the adoption and domestication processes. Activities here include reviewing the organization's strategic plan and action plan to align with and be responsive to ICAP aspirations, with special attention to Objective 5 that speaks directly to epilepsy. It also considers conducting the organization's capacity assessment and putting in place a capacity development plan, as well as reviewing internal policies. The second objective is creation of strategic collaborations and partnerships with key stakeholders, in particular relevant government departments, civil society organizations, organizations that operate in the neurological space, academicians, that is universities in particular, organizations for persons with epilepsy, among others. This is about gaining support of key strategic partners, formalizing and cementing partnerships, building capacity of key actors such as parliamentarians and healthcare workers, seeking buy-in of development partners, and engaging the government executive arm to take the lead. The third is to assess the policy and legislative environment with an aim of improving it and making it favorable for the adoption and domestication of ICAP. This involves determining gaps and weaknesses in policies and legislation in order to influence reviews on policies, laws, and regulations that are relevant to persons with epilepsy and other neurological disorders. Conceptually, then, we are implementing the project from two ends. On one end, we are looking at the internal environment, looking at our organization. Are the strategies in place okay and conducive, or they need to be reviewed? Are the action plans and policies conducive, or are they receptive, or can they enable the adoption and domestication? And wherever there are gaps and limitations, we look at aligning these with the ICAP aspirations. On the other hand, we look at the external environment. We identify who we partner with in government, in the civil society organization, and we also look at the at the policy environment, how conducive it is nationally, so that we can determine policy gaps. Then from there we will know who to lobby and for what, and what advocacy strategies and messages should we create. We use a number of tools to do this and approaches, including awareness campaigns. We use IEC material. We lobby, we advocate. We have educational campaigns, both public and focused. And we document the processes. From these objectives and this conceptual plan, we derive the 4 main activities that we are undertaking as a trendsetter chapter. The first one was strategic level engagement to define adoption and domestication, as well as formation of an IGAP technical working group. Our first assignment then was to define IGAP adoption and domestication and what it means for our country. 3 institutions were identified as key players that we engaged in defining the IGAP adoption and domestication. These are the Ministry of Health, where we engage with the Director of Health Services, the House of Senate Ministry of Health, Portfolio Committee Chairperson, and the World Health Organization Country Office. This was an important step for introducing the Trendsetter project and also to enable on actions that needed to be taken and to avoid ambiguity. And further to identify organizations and persons that should form an IGAP technical working group. 15 persons from various professions and sectors were therefore approached to form the ITWG, which is the IGAP technical working group. Institutions represented here are the Department of Social Welfare in the Deputy Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Health, NCT Unit, and Department of Mental Health. The micro projects under the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development, the University of Eswatini, Southern African Nazarene University, Autism Eswatini, Eswatini Medical Christian University, Persons with Epilepsy, and Royal Eswatini Police Academy. The ITWG functions as a central committee that meets regularly to discuss IGAP adoption and domestication processes, discuss reports, advising, analyzing, and reviewing information that is generated in the Trendsetter project. The ITWG agreed that in the Eswatini context, adoption means that government, through its relevant organs, should accept and commit to the implementation of the IGAP at country level, while domestication means engaging in activities that will make the IGAP applicable at national or domestic level, that making it beneficial to the citizens, in particular persons with epilepsy and other neurological disorders. Domestication therefore involves influencing and reviewing of certain policies, structures, systems, and practices. 6 pillars that explain what adoption and domestication means to Eswatini were identified. These 6 pillars underlie all programming, planning, and activities. They are as follows. The first one is advocacy and related actions to integrate and reflect the IGAP objectives into the country's policy framework, national strategies, EEO, strategic and action plan, as well as other practices across stakeholders, with the overarching goal to influence national and organizational policies and plans. We made some rhetoric questions just to challenge us to be sure that we are able to follow these pillars as we work. On this one, which is about advocacy and related actions, we ask ourselves, what actions are taken to integrate and reflect the IGAP objectives, especially Objective 5, in the country's policy framework and strategies? The second pillar is ensuring government's active involvement and leadership in the process. The question we ask ourselves is government actively involved in taking leadership in all processes? The third pillar is appropriately coordinated involvement and participation of all stakeholders. We ask ourselves, are stakeholders involved and properly coordinated? The fourth is active participation of persons with epilepsy and other neurological conditions in all processes. We ask ourselves, as we carry out the trendsetter, are people or persons with epilepsy and other neurological disorders involved in all processes? The fifth is identification of capacity gaps and putting in place capacity building initiatives for key actors. We ask ourselves, what capacity gaps exist that may hinder adoption and domestication of IGAP, and are they addressed effectively? The sixth, which is the last one, is raising awareness and public education and conduct research-oriented interventions on IGAP in order to influence scholarly works amongst academicians. We ask ourselves, are we increasing awareness and public education as well as conducting researches, and do we effectively influence scholarly works with the IGAP? This was our first of the main activities that we took, which was strategic level engagement to define adoption and domestication and formation of an IGAP technical working group. The second main activity is identification, classification, and analysis of relevant stakeholders. This activity culminated into a stakeholder management plan, which is a detailed document outlining each stakeholder, their conduct or focal person, conduct details, the stakeholder's point of interest in the IGAP and trendsetter project, their expected contributions and commitment to the project. It also rates the stakeholders' impact and influence on the project, as well as engagement plan with each stakeholder. This step was initiated through meetings with the Director of Coordinating Assembly for Non-Governmental Organizations, CANGO, who provided a database of all registered NGOs and CSOs in the country, and the Office of the Director of Health Service, who availed a list of relevant government departments. This information was presented to the Technical Working Group, or rather the ITWG, who were then able to identify organizations and departments that are relevant to the IGAP Trendsetter project. The relevant ones were then contacted to discuss the project and to avail focal persons, who are the ones reflected in the stakeholder management plan. As I've already said, for an example, in the Ministry of Health, who is a stakeholder, we had Dr. Vusi Makakula, the Director of Health Service, and we keep on updating it. So now, because he retired 2 months ago, he has been replaced by Dr. Okelo, and we have her contact number. The impact that this stakeholder has on the project is rated in low, medium, or high, and we found that it is high because the IGAP is more relevant to health issues in the country. How much influence does this stakeholder have over the project? We found that it is high also. What is important to this stakeholder, which is the Ministry of Health? It is increased and decentralized quality health services for all in the country in terms of health coverage for all, which is SDG 3. How could the stakeholder contribute to the project? It is by ensuring that epilepsy is included in the country's health priorities, and specifically, domestication of the ICAP is rooted in the National Health Agenda. Also, it is to ensure that EO is provided with a focal person for this project. How could the stakeholder, which is the Ministry of Health, block the project? It is by failure to take lead in policy advocacy and support of the ICAP. The strategy for engaging the stakeholder, it's quarterly roundtable discussions and monthly updates. And then we have a comment section on how we engage this stakeholder. We continue to engage the stakeholders as we progress. Subsequently, partnerships with certain stakeholders have been formalized through MOUs and commitment letters. We have signed one with Eswatini Medical Christian University on educational research and neurological. Another with Autism Eswatini on capacity building initiatives around neurological disorders. Then the third main activity is countrywide awareness and building capacities for health professionals and non-professionals, where a multi-sectoral approach to health sector capacity building is implemented as part of the IGAP awareness project. Members of the technical working group reaches out once in 2 months for awareness raising and training that are attended by clinic nurses, including their management, rural healthcare workers, community leaders, persons with epilepsy, and career guidance teachers to be engaged on the IGAP and how it can be adapted in local context. These trainings have attracted sponsorship from the Taiwan Healthcare Improvement Project, who have, upon seeing the translator work, decided to sponsor 4 workshops for 200 healthcare professionals, that is doctors and nurses in the fields of neurology and psychiatry. And no clinic or hospital will be left out in the whole country. The first workshop was held in October for the whole region, where 58 doctors and nurses were trained in phenomenology of epilepsy, pharmacology of anti-epilepsy agents, and status epilepticus, or an acute resuscitation of epilepsy. Manzini region is next on the 13th of January, and the last 2 regions, Shiselweni and region, will hold their trainings in February and March respectively. The fourth and the last main activity was reviewing the National Plan of Action to incorporate and capture the IGAP aspirations. Here we engaged a short-term consultant who worked with the ITWG in incorporating the IGAP objectives to our action plan. By analyzing each key strategic focus area as reflected in the strategic plan, there are 7 key strategic focus areas, and identifying the relevant IGAP objectives. This is done to ensure that EEO's outcomes relate both to EEO's objectives and IGAP objectives, and the subsequent activities thereof. As an example here, one of our key strategic focus areas, which is number 1, is advocacy, lobbying, and awareness. The objective of this key strategic focus area, according to our strategic and action plan, is to raise awareness about epilepsy and encourage decision makers, leaders, government officials to make changes to legislations or policy in support of epilepsy in Eswatini. And the outcomes here are a multi-sectoral advocacy strategy aimed at reducing stigma, discrimination, and human rights violations for people with epilepsy. And also, the second outcome is epilepsy integrated and mainstreamed within relevant national policy and legislations within and beyond the health sector, including education, social protection, and employment. We then had to identify the relevant IGAP objective to link with the EEO objective and also the outcomes. We found that objective 1, which is to raise prioritization and strengthen government for neurological disorders, is the relevant one. And also objective 5, which is to strengthen the public health approach to epilepsy and promote with other neurological disorders. So the activities that follow thereafter are responding or are an expansion of both the IGAP objective and our objective in a harmonious way. Let me end my presentation with stating challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned. The first one is government bureaucracy, where we found that penetrating the government bureaucratic system was quite a challenge, especially for our project, since EEO is a government supported organization. Moving from one step to another often requires government approval. And considering the current bureaucratic system, sometimes we had to move at snail pace because of some red tapes. The second one is that the multi-sectoralism of the IGAP demands high levels of coordination amidst existing bureaucratic systems. Considering that our project involves government ministries and departments, parastatals, the academia, in particular 2 universities, international development partners, that is UN, and now lately the Taiwanese medical mission. Thirdly, implementation of activities does not always happen according to laid down plans. There is a need to constantly revisit the plan to make necessary changes when needed. However, the overarching goal and strategic objectives should not be changed. Otherwise, the project might become meaningless and the implementer may lose focus. Some of our planned activities were delayed, and through constant monitoring, we were able to swap activities that were due according to the plan, but circumstances did not allow implementation with those that could easily be done under the same circumstances. This allowed us to be on point with timelines in spite of obvious challenges that could delay the project. Also, self-representation and participation participation of persons with epilepsy and other neurological conditions is an important factor to get valuable answers and lasting solutions to most challenges that we normally face as implementing organizations. Having a representative of persons with epilepsy, even in our technical working group, played an important role when we were reviewing our National Plan of Action by ensuring that the activities are addressing real problems that persons with epilepsy are facing. Policy advocacy takes a long time and requires patience and a lot of time investment. Most often, you have to lobby politicians and policymakers within government at individual level before you can win their support in collective decision making. The support of the Central Coordinating Office is key. IPE Africa Vice Chairperson played a huge role in providing guidance and advice, arranging periodic Zoom meetings for the trendsetters, thus creating a strong trendsetter team in the 4 countries. To build trust is a process on its own. It requires patience, yet it is important for meaningful collaborations and stakeholder engagement. Lastly, the project has opened many opportunities for EO due to the exposure, connections with different institutions and organizations. We've been networked better, even with international development partners, such as the Taiwanese Embassy, who supports the healthcare improvement project that we're already implementing on the other side as a result of the trendsetter. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abraham, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much to our participants for logging in. I just want to remind everybody that if you have a question or a comment, you can put it in the Q&A box and we'll look at it at the end of our 3 presentations. So our next presenter is Dr. Angelina Kakoza Mwesige. She is our final presenter. She obtained her MBCHB degree at Makerere University College in Kampala, Uganda, and completed residency in pediatrics at the same university in 1999. She then trained in epileptology and EEG at the Institute of Clinical Neurology, Bologna, Italy in 2001, under the mentorship of Professor Paul Chenapol. She also undertook several short courses in neuroscience and epilepsy conducted by the International Brain Research Organization in conjunction with the Society for Neuroscience in Africa at various training sites in Kenya and South Africa. In 2016, she obtained her doctorate in medicine in the field of pediatric neurology as a joint degree between Makerere University College of Health Sciences, Uganda, and Karolinska Institute, Sweden, for the dissertation of cerebral palsy in Ugandan children. Dr. Kakoza was a mentee awardee of the Collegium International Neuropsychopharmacologician Research Mentor Program from June 2005 to 2008 from the University of Mississippi Medical Center in the USA. As a mentor, she also received an African Epilepsy Society International Scholarship Award from November to December in 2005, undertaken at the Harvard Medical School Children's Hospital in Boston, USA, under the supervision of Professor Francis Johnson. So while she was in Boston, she came to know about the International League Against Epilepsy, and on her return to Uganda, she initiated the setting up of the Epilepsy Society of Uganda, a branch of the ILAE, and was founder president. She has participated as a member on various ILAE Commission task force committees from 2008 to present, including member of the task force created to develop guidelines for neonatal seizures a joint collaboration with the WHO and the ILAE, member of the Educational Commission Task Force from 2009 to 2012, member of the task force to review the operational definition of epilepsy, and member of the task force on seizures and epilepsies in the tropics from 2014 to 2017. Furthermore, in November 2010 in Dakar, Senegal, she was instrumental in contributing to the setting up of the first Commission on African Affairs of the ILAE, during which she served as treasurer from 2010 to 2013 and was re-elected for another term from 2014 to 2017. Her main research interests have been focused on pediatric epilepsy, autism, and cerebral palsy. She has been involved in several studies on epilepsy and was a co-principal investigator in a multi-site population-based study on the studies of the epidemiology of epilepsy in sub-Saharan Africa, founded by the Wellcome Trust UK. She was also one of the team of pioneer researchers for the studies on nodding syndrome in Uganda. She is an IBRO alumnus and currently holds a post as a board member of the African Regional Committee of the International Brain Research Organization for the period of 2014 to 2018, and she's also a board member of the African Child Neurology Association, and is the current treasurer and a founder member of the East African Academy on Childhood Disability. That's from January 2014 to date. She's an associate professor and child neurologist in the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health at the Makerere University and manages the Pediatric Neurology and Epilepsy Clinic at the Mulago National Referral Hospital in Kampala, as well as leads the inpatient pediatric neurology ward in the same hospital. She is the author of more than 80 papers in peer-reviewed journals and 3 chapters in international textbooks. She's a mentor to many under and postgraduate medical students and has mentored a number of students in the later group to carry out studies on epilepsy. She is on the editorial board for the Epileptic Disorders Journal and is a regular reviewer for many African and international peer-reviewed journals. She has also participated in reviewing abstracts for the International Epilepsy Congress meetings. She has been an invited speaker for several International Epilepsy Congress and the International Bureau for Epilepsy meetings, as well as African and Latin American Epilepsy Congresses. Welcome, Dr. Angelina Kakoza. You can now go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. My name is Angelina Kakoza. I am a child neurologist and an associate professor of pediatrics and child health at Makerere University College of Health Sciences. It gives me great pleasure to share with you this presentation on advocacy and stigma. I'll share my screen. So the topic is on advocacy and stigma in epilepsy, and these are my disclosures. When we look at epilepsy, we note it's a disease that is stigmatized globally and affects people of all ages. It knows no race and no gender divide, as well as income levels. Many poor populations, especially those that are found in low and middle income countries, which Africa comprises of, bear the brunt in terms of the threat that epilepsy confers in terms of public health, economic and social development. Several programs have introduced sensitization efforts in an effort to try to reduce stigma towards people with epilepsy in various settings in Africa. However, when we look at the global situation of epilepsy, we note that it's actually getting quite alarming. The number of annually newly diagnosed epilepsy cases now exceeds 5 million, and it's set to increase over the next decade. Furthermore, people with epilepsy carry a significantly enhanced risk of premature death compared to that of the general population. They suffer a host of comorbidities, including things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. We can also get autism. We can get cerebral palsy, to mention but a few. And the number of people with epilepsy is projected to increase further due to improvement in living conditions, increasing proportion of people surviving brain injuries, which later on go on to develop epilepsy, and the rising life expectancy worldwide. Now, the great challenge is that even when you try to control these seizures with anti-seizure medications, epilepsy still presents numerous potential clinical challenges that contribute to the vulnerability of these individuals. And among these vulnerable conditions is epilepsy stigma. Epilepsy stigma is considered to be one of the most important with negative influence on people with epilepsy. And it may happen to be more harmful on the patient's life than the disease of epilepsy itself. So, what is stigma? The word stigma originates from the Latin word stigmat, which means a mark or a brand, or from the Greek word stizen, which means to tattoo. The concept of stigma was first explored by Goffman, and who defined stigma as a distinguishing mark, especially of disgrace, or as an attribute that is deeply discrediting. Later on, Jacobi explored this concept and distinguished two types of stigma, that is enacted stigma and felt stigma. When we look at enacted stigma, it refers to episodes of discrimination against people with epilepsy solely on grounds of their social unacceptability and ranges from things like exclusion from sports, social and education activities, using the disease as a negative attribute. For example, some people who have epilepsy are not employed. They are fired because they have a seizure at work, or they just directly discriminate, bully, or isolate them. While felt stigma refers to that shame associated with living with epilepsy or the fear of enacted stigma. And this cannot be the only source of anxiety and depression. It also initiates a vicious cycle of self-isolation and many more lost opportunities. So to put it simply, in other words, when we talk about the types of stigma, we can look at them in two types of flavor. The stigma flavor number one is the public stigma. That's the enacted stigma. When we look at it in terms of the stereotype negative belief about a group, you find that people are looked at as dangerous, incompetent, or they are weak in some way. And that prejudice, agreement, or belief that the community has about them, or the negative emotional reaction, results in anger or fear. And the discriminatory behavior or the response to the prejudice can manifest as avoiding this person, withholding employment or housing opportunities, or withholding help. When we look at the second flavor, which is the self-stigma or the felt stigma, the stereotype or negative belief about self makes this person feel like, I think I'm weak, I'm incompetent, I can't do anything. And this prejudice agreement with belief or negative emotional reaction results in low self-esteem, low self-efficacy, and the discriminatory behavior or response to this prejudice makes this person fail to pursue work, fail to pursue any opportunities that may come, within their jurisdiction. So when we look at the background of epilepsy stigma, epilepsy is not only a medical diagnosis, but it's a social label that makes people with epilepsy to be perceived as contagious, insane, evil, spiritually possessed or demonically possessed, and a target of prejudicial behavior in many spheres of life. When you look at the symptoms and signs of epilepsy, many times you find that they are unhidden, they are obvious. Everyone can see, especially when you have active convulsive epilepsy. And they are unpredictable, and the person is perceived to be out of control. By losing control of themselves, for example, defecating on themselves, urinating on themselves, reverting to these primitive acts, they are viewed as uniquely dangerous, and they're thought to be under the control of some supernatural power, because naturally someone would be, if you're an adult, you should be in control, or if you've reached above a certain age, you should be in control of your bowel habits. But when they see you in that state where you have lost control, they believe that you are out of control, but some other supernatural power is now the one in control. So stigmatization of people living with epilepsy occurs at the individual, where it's internalized. We've had the felt stigma, interpersonal, institutional, and community levels. And this creates a lot of misconceptions, with the public viewing epilepsy as a mysterious illness, as a mystery, as something that is really very frightening rather than a physical disease. And the lack of precise information that always circulates around, because one myth leads to another, you find that even these myths are being entertained amongst us health professionals, leading to a lot of misinformation. The media hypes about this, movies and the internet distorts the public perception. So you find all of this together with the stigmatizing labels, for example, calling them epileptic, zontos, fuel all these myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings in these vulnerable people. And we find that in low and middle income countries, the level of stigma ranges between 31 to 69. And we find that also families are able to feel this stigma. You find mothers feeling stigmatized because their children have seizures, such that it becomes a big problem, not only for the individual with epilepsy, but for all those that are within that person's family. So much so that stigma now is considered one of the greatest problems reported by people with epilepsy by the WHO report in 2019, which indicated that stigma experienced by people with epilepsy is more difficult to overcome than the seizures themselves, and the fear of stigmatization prevents people with epilepsy from seeking treatment. Other manifestations, as I previously mentioned, was the reflected or courtesy epilepsy stigma, the kind of stigma that the whole family members and even those who have as an associated patient feel. You find that parents with children with epilepsy often feel a sense of shame, that their child is seen as bestowing shame on the whole family by virtue of being unusual or odd. So they wouldn't want to identify with this child. They'll keep the child out of the limelight, pretend she or he does not exist because of that reflected or courtesy epilepsy stigma. Then there's the anticipated interpersonal stigma, where there are fears and expectations of experiencing negative reactions and attitudes from others around them. And the institutionalized stigma is the position taken by society through its laws and regulations. For example, in the past, there used to be laws that people with epilepsy should not marry, people with epilepsy should not get children, things like that. Now, based on some systematic review done by Kadu Mukasa and colleagues, these are just showing you some of the misconceptions regarding epilepsy in sub-Saharan Africa. You find that the categories were divided into 6. They are those misconceptions regarding employment. For example, people with epilepsy should not be employed. Then there are those regarding restrictions and limitations. For example, people with epilepsy cannot participate in sports. Then there are those related to cause and nature of epilepsy, where they say epilepsy is transmitted by saliva. Others actually even say that it's transmitted by flatus. The contagion is there through the saliva. Dare touch the saliva, you get epilepsy. Then there are things regarding treatment that, epilepsy should be treated by traditional healers. It is not curable. Then the first aid for seizures, you find so many dangerous actions that are done. Some put a spoon between the teeth, others give sweets during the seizure. There was some lady who told me that she puts garlic to the nose of her child so that the child can get up. All sorts of first aid seizures that they believe are going to help this child, when in reality there is no evidence-based support for why they're doing all this. Then integration into communities, you find, as I mentioned earlier, objection to marriage. They should not play with normal people. Even some people, when they realize that the child has epilepsy in a certain school, switch schools and take the child to another school just because of epilepsy. And when we look at the perceptions about epilepsy among traditional healers, they found out that actually more than 2 in 5 would object to their children associating with people with epilepsy or even marrying them. And half of these traditionally healers linked epilepsy to insanity. More than 2/3 employed dangerous maneuvers like placing a spoon or a cloth in the mouth, tying the person down, putting the head in a toilet hole, or forcing medicines down the throat. So you can see these perceptions are really appalling. And when you look at the perceptions amongst the people with epilepsy themselves, well, many of them had a biological explanation as to the cause of the epilepsy. Maybe it resulted from birth injury, inheritance, or infection. And many of them preferred modern medicine in managing their epilepsy compared with, say, traditional healers, where many said they were not helpful. But what was sad was they had concerns about disclosing their illness, difficulties in getting married, or even experienced problems in ongoing marriage. So you find that amongst themselves, the felt stigma was really an issue. An example in northern Uganda, where the perceptions about epilepsy of patients who have had continuous long-standing epilepsy, the belief is that this epilepsy was a result of witchcraft or curses and cannot be controlled. If a patient believes this way, definitely they will not come to the Western medication, they will not come to you to seek treatment. They're going to go to where they believe this epilepsy is going to be treated. Then when we looked at when they looked at factors associated with misconceptions, they realized that epilepsy misconceptions are most likely to occur in individuals with low education attainment, those who live in rural areas, males, and those having poor knowledge regarding epilepsy and associated stigma. Then when you look at the factors associated with stigma among communities and people with epilepsy stigma was also most likely to occur in individuals with less education, low socioeconomic status, rural residents, having farming as an occupation, having never been exposed to a person with epilepsy, witchcraft practices associated with health problems, and less knowledge on the correct cause of epilepsy. So you find that all of these factors, based on these systematic reviews, have been linked to those people who are more likely to experience stigma when they have epilepsy. So how do we silence this stigma? Better still, how do we stop the stigma? There is need for advocacy to address epilepsy stigma because we know that advocacy beats stigma. What is advocacy? Advocacy is to change what is into what should be. So looking at the socio-ecological model, advocacy using interventions that encompass the 4 levels at the individual, targeting their attitudes, beliefs, personal history, at the relationship level, looking at the family, partners, peers, and social groups, looking at the community in terms of the institutions, the schools, the churches, the neighborhoods, the workplaces, and society as a whole, looking at social policies, social norms, cultural norms, using this socio-ecological model. Interventions on advocacy, using these interventions, can encompass them and make them a much more integrated way of achieving success in terms of advocacy for these individuals. Efforts for advocacy and reducing stigma can also include raising awareness and better public understanding of epilepsy and other related neurological disorders. Also, initiatives that can improve the inclusion of these individuals, focusing on reaching the most vulnerable, including migrants, children, women, older people, and those living in poverty and emergency settings, and ensuring that you include all the gender and diversity, addressing disparities specific to each national context. Also, we need to develop innovative strategies to strengthen efforts and national leadership to support policies that contribute to improving the public attitudes towards stigma. People with epilepsy and their carers, organizations that represent them, need to be empowered and involved in all of this: advocacy, policy planning, legislation, service provision, monitoring, research in epilepsy. That is why the IGAP came up with these possible action points for member states to adapt in terms of advocacy for epilepsy. 1, the importance of engaging all relevant stakeholders, including people with neurological disorders and their carers, to design and implement awareness-raising programs to improve understanding, programs to promote brain health and prevent and manage neurological disorders across the life course, and also identify and overcome any setbacks to appropriate health-seeking behavior. Secondly, also to lead and coordinate a multi-sectoral advocacy strategy. This multi-sectoral advocacy strategy should reduce stigma and discrimination and human rights violations of people with neurological disorders, responding especially to vulnerable groups across the life course, and integrate this within the broader health promotion strategies. And in collaboration with relevant stakeholders, non-government organizations, all those that are important in this play, focus on all those areas, right from prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and care. Actively engage these stakeholders across the sectors, implement evidence-based national policies with them, legislation in consultation with people with neurological disorders and their carers, and the policies and plans should promote and protect their rights and prevent stigma and discrimination. Also, these health policies should be developed in such a way that they reflect the views of the people with epilepsy and their families, not the healthcare views, but those of the people with epilepsy and their families, ensuring that gender and diversity are addressed and also the most vulnerable are considered. Furthermore, they should reflect the views by also promoting and protecting the rights of people with epilepsy, prohibiting discrimination, for example, in areas of education. They should be taken to school, employment, they should be employed, they can get married, they can get children, they can obtain a driving license, of course, in consultation with their doctors, and all other recreation activities, they should participate in them. The health policies also should reflect the views of their families by setting up an accountability system that can monitor and evaluate the implementation of relevant policies, legislation in keeping with the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. Therefore, it is now time to change, and the perception that having epilepsy makes a person unacceptable, different from others, leading to prejudice and discrimination against them should stop. To quote Jacqueline Novogratz, The time for change is now. And we know that if you have a voice, use it. If you have legs, stand up. If you have feet, step up. If you have each other, fight together. Let us fight together to stop this stigma. Thank you for listening. I'll invite questions when it's time for questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Angelina, for that presentation, which has taken us, from the root causes of stigma, and what can be done, and also linking it up with the IGAP, seeing what needs to be done, not only by the right bearers, but also by the duty bearers themselves. So we really appreciate so much. Let me thank all the presenters for your well prepared and well presented presentations that you gave today. Let me hand over to my co-moderator, Dr. Mwendaweli.
Okay, thank you so much for all the presentation. Thank you so much. Like I earlier said, if you have any question, comment, please put it in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. I think I have some comments in our Q&A box from Edward Shabangu. So I think this is for Mr. Abraham. Looking at the rising number of people with epilepsy and getting anticonvulsant treatments, are there any measures to assist healthcare providers in Eswatini to specialize in the management of epilepsy? Such measures may include affording them scholarships, specialized workshops, assist them in attending interventional conventions and seminars in epilepsy. And then he also further says a country that has so many people living with epilepsy does not have a resident neurologist. As much as this is a very technical problem, but an embarrassment to the nation and for the people living with epilepsy, are there any international means that can be done to assist countries with low income to access international standard of healthcare and management in terms of having resident specialists and probably equipment? I think you can take those two, Mr. Abraham.
Thank you so much, Nalusha, and also thank you, Mr. Edward Shabangu, for your questions. I will attempt to answer them, but maybe I may be limited to some extent, and I think the other participants here can also learn from these questions and think about it, and also do some advocacy work outside of our scope to assist. The first one on looking at the number of people with epilepsy and getting anticonvulsant treatments. Yes, we have a very serious problem in Eswatini with these anticonvulsant treatments. The first problem that we are experiencing is that we normally have shortages of these. And because of this, we have seen a situation where most of what could be prevented or what could be managed in epilepsy graduated into psychosis and other psych conditions. That this we saw mainly after the during the COVID-19 era, when it was a peak, because there was a time when for about 6 months, there were some medicines that were not there, almost no medicine at all. And then the problem, increased to that level where the situation got so worse. And also, the cost of medicine in the country is very, very high. I don't know with other African countries, but we only learn that in developed countries, one can be treated with less than $10, like $6 a year. For us in the country, some of us spend over $176 a month. You can compare that against the $6 or $7, $176 a month. And being a low-income country and epilepsy being associated with poverty, you can see how the situation is. This is then the area where we think advocacy should come in strongly. Also then concerning, he said what? Means of assisting countries like ours to access international standard of healthcare and management in terms of having resident specialists and probably equipment. This is one area that really needs to be taken seriously, because like he says, we don't have even a single resident neurologist in the country. And this is very, very, crucial. This is one reason. Then we had to, we are appreciating what the Trendsetter project has achieved in terms of exposing us to the neurologists from the Republic of China in Taiwan, who have then since started training our healthcare specialists. But then we think this is only just to raise awareness, but really we cannot survive without at least just one resident neurologist the whole country. This is really embarrassing and it's a shame. And I hope we will be assisted with how we can advocate for this. We are trying our best, like you've seen in my presentation, that we're also having some advocates and lobbying sessions with Parliament, and we are putting some of our guns and ammunition there, so that when the ministries present their reports, they can be taken to task in that regard. Yes, that's what I can say for now. But thank you, Mr. Edward, for raising these crucial issues. And I think the reason why you are raising them is because, if I remember well, you are one person that is working in the psych areas, and in the psych hospitals, and the challenges that you are facing when you meet a client who requires a neurologist, and there is none in the country where you can refer the client to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abraham, for those answers. And well, just on that point, I just want to ask, since Eswatini is part of the 4 countries that are trying to implement the IGAP in Africa, how has the implementation been? How easy has it been, especially with regards to participation from your local Ministry of Health or from government in terms of influencing policy? How has it been? Has it been something that they've been on board, or is it still the same thing that most African countries face, where the government commits and it just ends up being a promissory note, and when it comes to actual implementation, you really have to knock on a lot of doors and force people, and you find that the response involves them dragging their feet?
Thank you, Nalusha. Well, what I can say is, since the beginning of this Trendsetter project, there has been some hope in terms of having government, especially the Minister of Health and the Deputy Prime Minister's office, to be responsive to the needs of persons with epilepsy. I'll make an example in that since in our country, neurological disorders have no real home, so to say, because they are not regarded as disabilities to some extent. And they are seen mainly as a health issue. Yet the disability department is with the Deputy Prime Minister's office, while health is looking at just the health aspect, the medicine and treatment. So we've been caught in between the two. But since the beginning of the trendsetter, we've been able to penetrate, and we are already part of the disability mainstreaming systems in the country. And we're able to voice our concerns such that we are starting to see our people with epilepsy, those whose epilepsy maybe has, has led to some disability, they are now involved in the disability. They are now receiving some disability grant, which was not the case before. So we think we are moving, even though it's at a snail pace, but there are some improvement. And also the Ministry of Health on the other side, previously we didn't have a focal person we were working with, but now we already have the head of the NCT, the non-communicable diseases, who is now part of our technical working group on the ICAP. So we think the trendsetter has really shaken, the status quo, and we are hoping that in future engagements, we will reach to a point where some of these issues will be addressed. And also the World Health Office, World Health Organization or country office has been very instrumental in helping us. Like I mentioned, how we set the tone and engaged these key entities, World Health Organization, Ministry of Health, Directorate of Health Services, and Parliament portfolio committees. We wanted to have support at the highest level when we engage these three. So the World Health Organization gave us Dr. Makatsange, who is the health promotion officer. He has been very instrumental he goes with us whenever we go to meet these government officials in the Ministry of Health and others, and also when we engage with parliamentarians to explain the ICAP and remind them on the country's commitments and advise them that they should act accordingly and not only be there to have, sign some papers out there, but they need to be on the ground, to be seen, to be making the changes at policy level. I hope I answered you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to address the next comment to Mr. Frederick. Thank you so much for sharing your epilepsy expeditions with us, the awareness walk, mountain climbing, and the long distance cycling. So now, for people who want to join you on these expeditions, especially those outside Kenya, how do they get to contact you and take part, especially on your next expedition? How do they get to know if you're carrying out another one and participate?
Thank you so much. Good question. When we saw the impact of the expedition, so we resolved to be doing epilepsy expeditions after every 2 years. So that's why we did the first one in 2018 and then 2020. And this 2022, we were doing our first ever marathon, of which I am set to run at the BMW Dallas Marathon, which is from 9th to 11th of December, this coming week. But because we have so many people who want to participate, we have already done a Nairobi epilepsy run here in Kenya about 2 weeks ago. For those that would like to actually participate, the reason why we are trying to do activities and events which are very practically so that others can also organize the same in their countries. They might not necessarily be able to come, but if it's an idea, they feel they are able to emulate and organize and plan locally in their country, I think that would be easy. But there is also an opportunity for you to join us here in Kenya, or when we have the ultimate expedition where we are going to, say, Mount Kilimanjaro or these marathons that I've just mentioned about, you can contact us on the contacts that have just been displayed there.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And then you talked about, I think, a magazine. Is it the Women's Magazine? And you've contributed several articles. So all these is it just you contributing, or you welcome articles from other people that may want to also contribute some impact stories? How does it go?
Good question. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a platform and a column within the magazine that we have been given to actually do epilepsy advocacy and awareness stories, not only in Kenya, but across. And because this is a national newspaper and under the Standard Media Group, which is also across East and Central Africa, I think it's a platform where if we have other people who have stories they would like them to be highlighted and published, this is still a platform that they are so much welcomed. So it's not only me, but I have also been giving opportunities to others to actually also be able to share their stories and they get published.
Thanks, Fred, for all those responses. Quite interesting. And I've got a question for Angelina. I really liked your presentation, and this is a presentation that I would expect some of us as advocates to be saying more of what you're saying, other than from a medical personnel. But I know you are an advocate in yourself. Angelina, I wanted to ask, when it comes to advocates, how can those that are in the medical sphere work together with those we call advocates, or maybe some call them users, some call them patients, some call them clients, to amplify the voice? We have seen other movements such as the HIV/AIDS, the TB movement, doing quite a lot around advocates on their issues. How do you think we can work together, to amplify our voice?
Thank you, Amos, for that question. It is $1 million question, because the way that we can try to help the patients that we take care of, I think, is actually to, sometimes it's the best way to help somebody is just to try and be in their shoes and imagine yourself. I'm not saying that we're going to go around feeling stigmatized, but just imagine what they go through. That's when you get empathy. That's when you're able to really stand up for them. So many times as medical people, we want to complete lines. We just want to finish the line and go and do other things. But do we really sit down and take time to listen to their stories? Do we give them a listening ear? And do we get to know what the other issues are? Yes, we do manage seizures, but there are other things that are even much, much more problematic to our patients than the seizures themselves. And this is the stigma. So as medical people, probably before we can even start to advocate, to understand our patients and to know where they're coming from and what it is that they are what they are experiencing, and they need to have a voice. And where can this voice start from? Because when you start if you want to start anything, you have to start as a team, and you need to have many people backing you on this. You need political will. You need to have the resources in place. You need to ensure that at least you have that support that can help these people's voice be heard. Many times they don't have drugs. They don't have a say in terms of probably, ensuring that they are kept safe. So many things, like other things they would also want to enjoy, like other people who don't have epilepsy. But we as medical people could be with them, ensure that they have a voice, ensure that we have these other people, the politicians and all who are relevant stakeholders, coming on board to sit and we discuss these issues together with them, so that when it comes to voicing them and talking about them in the political arena, where they make these policies, where they do all these things, they can have a say. Getting days, for example, like this year, together with the Epilepsy Support Association Uganda, we invited parliamentarians. And as the medical person, I had to talk to them about what is epilepsy, how does a person with epilepsy behave, what is it that we need, and we wanted to advocate for drugs, to make them ensure that there is a bill that ensures that these drugs are there. So working as teams, ensuring that we have the people who have the political will, who are going to make sure that these policies are put in place, is a way to begin. And then the others can also come in. I liked so much what Frederick presented in terms of innovativeness. The innovativeness can occur in many ways, and depending on the culture, depending on what is actually the in thing in that particular culture. If, for example, the in thing is fashion, showing, champions, having epilepsy champions who can come out without feeling the shame and say, yes, I have epilepsy, but look, I'm beautiful. I'm dressed in this nice dress. I can be able to do this. We don't have that in the African culture. We're still hidden. We still feel that even we as health professionals are like, you have epilepsy? Oh, so if we ourselves are feeling that stigma, how do we expect our patients to also come out? So I think it's really for us as health professionals to also get out of that cocoon, be able to help our patients, get the political people who can make these laws, which can ensure drugs are on board, resources to help the people are there, and then get innovative ways. And the innovative ways, it's many, many things. I can't say that it's only this way, but it might be probably like, setting up it can be some activity which is going to really be very attractive at all levels, with children, with the adults, with the elderly, whatever it may be. But it has to be something that can catch their attention. And they say, oh, then epilepsy is just like any other illness. There's nothing big here. So I will talk until the cows come home. Let me stop here. Thank you for the question.
No, thank you so much for your response. And there's need for that, intersectoral collaboration, working together so that we really strengthen our voices through working together. Over to you, Naluka.
I just have one comment, Angelina, in your presentation, you talked I think you mentioned a point about the things that contribute to stigma, where people are isolating, and you have patients with people living with epilepsy having special schools, which I've actually seen that we have put our people living with our children with epilepsy in special schools, and now there's been a call to integrate them into ordinary schools. I don't know, Angelina, and maybe Action Amos through the IB, how have you experienced or heard about how this is going, and how to better integrate them in these ordinary schools and not special schools?
Yeah, this is really a bone of contention at the moment. Even us in Uganda, we have two schools of thought, because there is the special needs schools that have been there time immemorial, and that's where they take patients maybe who have autism, maybe children who have intellectual disability, even patients who have epilepsy, if they feel that, they've categorized them as people who need to go there. But we're now moving away from special needs and we're going into inclusive schools. But you find that people are still stuck in between, and that transition has not completely gone on. So you find that there are still those who take them to special schools, and there are those who take them into inclusive schools. I can talk for my country, Uganda. We have a policy that actually all children with any disability are supposed to go into inclusive schools. But what's the challenge? You find that the teachers themselves fear these children. They've not been educated in terms of how to train in case, okay, I was hearing Fred talking about epilepsy smart, that many teachers are not epilepsy smart. They don't know how to care for a child who has epilepsy and has a seizure. When the child has a seizure, they also take off, and the students also follow the teacher. So who's going to help our children if the teachers themselves are not trained? So the curriculum needs to be revamped. The teachers' training has to be revamped. There has to be a way that people have to understand that having epilepsy does not set you apart. Our children with epilepsy should also attend schools just like any other and get the benefits of inclusive schools and be able to also be helped, stimulated with their other typically developing peers. But we're still stuck in that olden way. So you find that some go to special schools, some go to inclusive schools. And then the Ministry of Education has not really put it into practice that, we're closing down the special schools, we are now going into inclusive. So there's still that confusion. And so many things are on paper when in reality, there's nothing on the ground. So it's really a sore point. At least I'm talking for my country. I don't know what it's like in your area, but there's still confusion regarding this. But we should go inclusive and have these children have the same benefits, the same exposure, just like they are typically developing peers. Thank you.
Okay. And then maybe just one last thing. I know we're running out of time. Our epilepsy as a psychiatric disorder. I think I'll use an example of my country in Zambia and other countries that have clinical officers, especially those trained in psychiatry. For a long time, we've had the psychiatry department actually handling patients who are having epilepsy. And so because of the limited number of neurologists on the continent, it has been perceived that indeed epilepsy is a psychiatric disorder, and it's quite a challenge moving this notion of it being a psychiatric disorder to a neurological disorder. I don't know what your experience has been, but in my country, we recently had mental health guidelines that were published this year, and I was looking at it, and then I saw under the heading other mental health disorders, I saw epilepsy there, and I was quite shocked because now we have neurologists, and I'm like, the notion should actually move from epilepsy being a mental health disorder to an actual neurological disorder, not to take away anything from the psychiatrists that have managed this problem for a long time. But I think there needs to be more advocacy on letting people know that epilepsy is not a mental health disorder. Of course, they may have cognitive impairment from maybe prolonged medication or uncontrolled seizures, but I don't know how your experience has been with trying to get the government to indeed understand that we need to move epilepsy from the mental health department to under the non-communicable department if they have a neurology department, or just leave it broadly as a non-communicable disease, but get it out of mental health.
What you're going through, Naluka, is exactly what we're going through. In Uganda, epilepsy is under the mental health division. And even when we've had meetings, it is considered under mental health. Patients here, it's because of what they view people with epilepsy to be. They think they're insane, they think they are mentally ill. So that's where they're going to go to the psychiatric ward. And you find that many patients go to the psychiatric referral hospital, get mismanaged, and then they come to us. And by that time, if we can salvage what we can, we try and do our best. But getting this mentality out, even right, this is a very vivid example because the Ministry of Health themselves, you talk to them, this is a neurological disease and we have to manage it this way, but they'll still put it under mental health. It is non-communicable disease section in the Ministry of Health, but they still have epilepsy under mental health. And then they come up with guidelines, oh, this is mental and neurological disease department, but they still put epilepsy under mental health. So we really, as health advocates, need to, as health worker people, we need to advocate for that. And of course, talking to them, it takes time. It may not occur in my generation, may not occur in my time, but we keep on talking, we keep on telling them, but never giving up, I suppose. But we shall get there one day.
Okay, thank you so much to all our presenters, Mr. Frederick, Mr. Abraham, and Dr. Angelina for the wonderful presentations. There's just another comment in the Q&A. So this is from Petronilla Camonto. She said, even I am a healthcare provider. My life as a person living with epilepsy, I still believe that much is left out on epilepsy. The people living with epilepsy is much kept a distance from decision and policy making. I talk about epilepsy, educate others, but I am left out. I have left myself out of my care access. Stigma, my brain is used for study, but no treatment. Epilepsy propagates other conditions. Failure to treat epilepsy adequately leads more NCDs, leading to a higher burden on pills and bills. This leads to more stigma with results on poor treatment and access. I think this was more of a comment than a question. Thank you so much, Petronella, for that comment. Indeed, we have a lot to do in terms of fighting stigma and integrating everyone into society. And I think she puts congratulations, Dr. Angelina, for standing out beyond practicing medicine to advocacy. So we know that indeed to fight stigma, we really have to do a lot of sensitization to a lot of public sensitization about epilepsy. That's one way, and I think a major way we can fight stigma. And thank you so much, Mr. Frederick, for all your epilepsy expeditions. I think it's one way of raising awareness when people have, instead of just listening to someone talk, but you have all these expeditions and activities that people can do, and actually getting people within the community who are living with epilepsy to take part. And all the best to Mr. Abraham with the implementation. And I hope other countries may follow and take part, because you are like the trendsetters, especially on the continent. So thank you so much to all our presenters. Action Amos, do you have any last words?
Well, mine is just to thank everyone for all the nice presentations and nice response, and also to thank you, Dr. Naluka, for handling this well, and all those that are behind the scenes that made this webinar a success. Thank you so much.
Okay, and then one last thing, I think the slide will be coming up. You may have seen it at the beginning when we just started our Zoom session, talking about the Global Epilepsy Project database. So this database provides a registry of existing epilepsy projects throughout Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, as well as in other regions. So it identifies information such as project location, institutional partners, project scope, funding sources, and volunteer needs. So it's a database that is actually quick and easy to complete. So you submit information on your project. So when you do that, you inform understanding of efforts that are occurring throughout the world to narrow the epilepsy treatment gap. And it will also provide you an opportunity to learn from others and to explore collaboration opportunities that might strengthen your own work as well as that of the sector. Furthermore, the database will allow people from different areas such as governments, academia, non-profit or philanthropy to learn about existing efforts while offering a means to engage. So I'd like to encourage everyone, especially on the African continent, if you're carrying out any project, please register your project with on the ILAE website. There's the Global Epilepsy Project database at the bottom. It doesn't have to be a project that is already done, even one that is ongoing. So I'd encourage you to actually submit your project on the ILAE website. And then last thing, please make sure you scan the QR code to receive your certificate. There's also a link in the chat box. There's also a link that will be put in the chat box so that you can see how you can get your certificate. Please complete the survey for you to get your certificate. Once more, thank you to everybody who has logged in to listen to all the presentations that I've made, those who've come through with comments and questions. Thank you so much for attending this EpiSkills session and all the other sessions that have occurred throughout the year 2022. And as we close the year, compliments of the season to everyone. Thank you so much.